Hello, hey everyone, thank you. So this is great that we actually get to do this talk here at FIT because Roger and I first heard about Antonio Lopez here at FIT when, I guess it was what, 86?
It wasn't that long.
It's like in 1986 and we were doing Saturday classes here and we had our teachers like put up all these drawings all over the walls and say, this is how you have to draw. And we were like, oh my God, that's like a big shoes to fill. But it's great because we've gone to talk about this book in London, Paris, Los Angeles, Brooklyn, everywhere. And so this is our last stop on the train.
And also it's so great to be here because Antonio is an FIT alumni. He met his partner Juan Ramos here at FIT and really began his entire career. So in addition to also speaking on the stage various times, so it's actually it's a good place to cap it off. The drawings and the artwork and all the work in the editorials for the magazines, they were all signed as Antonio. Antonio, the way we see it, is actually the product of two people. It's Antonio Lopez, who was the talent. He could draw. He chose to just sign it as Antonio. But when we say Antonio, we're actually talking about Antonio Lopez and Juan Ramos.
So Antonio and Juan met here at FIT. They started a romantic relationship, and then they started working together. And pretty soon after that, Women's Wear Daily came calling and asked Antonio to join Women's Wear Daily. So they started doing the covers. He started doing things that illustrators who had been in Women's Wear Daily for many years were not doing yet. And I think that this caught the attention of a lot of different people, and namely the editor at the New York Times, Carrie Donovan.
Actually meant to go and buy the coat that weekend. It wasn't meant to inspire, it wasn't meant to convey a lifestyle, it wasn't meant to reflect what was going on in culture. And that's really what Antonio did, and we could even see it very early on in some, there we go, this is for New York Times, and this is very early 60s, pre-women's movement, women are just starting to go to work, and he really started reflecting what he saw on the street and what he saw that was happening with his friends and putting it on the page.
All of a sudden women were running around, they were getting taxis, they were putting lipstick on in the mirror, they were on motorcycles, and these were things that were not really seen in fashion illustration here. They were in different environments. What he was trying to do was convey a lifestyle of what this woman was doing and who she was and who she was dating and what she was about. Now these are different techniques that he also ended up using. Backtrack?
Yeah.
Listen, we're brothers, so we fight, so we're going to fight up here. Don't get upset about that.
The other things, when you look at go to the one before.
The one before?
Yeah. I mean, this is, the way Antonio could draw, if you just look at the simplistic line in this one, and also the environment, he could draw a room, a motorcycle, a horse. He could really draw anything. And if you look also at the different styles that he's able to do, he was really able to make these illustrations something more. I wish we had an example of what illustrations look like at this point, but I think a lot of you guys, sort of know the sort of FIT crowd, but, just this sort of, this isn't just selling that little jumper, this is selling, it's Easy Rider, it's, liberation, their hair is flowing, they're together, they're two women together, whatever that means. I mean, this is really a lifestyle, it's so new for the time. It's still new to me today, but for the time when if you opened up the Sunday newspaper and you saw this, it was mind-blowing and shocking. Huge. And, he would do covers of Elle magazine. This one we love just because we found the original drawing without the photograph on it. But, the experimentation that he did, they started calling him the Picasso of fashion because there were so many different styles and medias that he could work in and working expertly on. And one of the great things that Antonio and Juan did together was, Juan was a huge art fan. so they started incorporating the art movements that were happening at the time. So,
Pop art, op art.
here you can see examples of pop art, and that's one as well. So they were friendly and looking at Warhol's work, at Lichtenstein's work. They were looking at op artists, and really taking fashion illustration to another level.
And these were all in the 60s.
These are amazing. These were inspired by Leger, Cubist-inspired stuff. And these are great. This is part of a psychedelic series, which Richard Avedon later for Look magazine did a psychedelic portrait of the Beatles that apparently was groundbreaking, and everyone couldn't believe that Richard Avedon was using psychedelia in
This
fashion.
predated it about a year and a half
Yeah, this is
beforehand.
1 whole year before that.
These are fantastic.
And we actually hear a lot of stories that women would look at Antonio's illustrations and rush to the stores to purchase what they would see, and then get really disappointed because it never looked as cool as
It's never as exaggerated as couldn't get that movement. Now this is Antonio and Kathy David. Kathy David was a Native American Indian model. And what's very interesting about Antonio is that he didn't just go to modeling agencies to find models. He went everywhere to look for models. And if you saw a gorgeous girl on the street or in the park, in Central Park, he would get them and he would make them into top models. Kathy's one of the girls that he found. Cleveland is another. Girls were not being used in high fashion as much as Antonio brought them to the forefront, which I think is something very important, right, Pat?
Yeah, absolutely. Color palette.
Yeah. So, here's some more of Kathy David.
He used to call her his sister because they had the same curly hair.
We're friends with Anna Sui, and she said that when she first saw Antonio's illustrations of Kathy Damon, and she was, 7 or 8, that she made her mother buy her a little curly afro wig.
She would wear it.
So these illustrations, they weren't just seen as illustrations, they were enormously influential, even to someone like Anna Sui, who was 7.
Can I say something about Kathy? Okay. So Kathy had a mysterious past. She was about 16, and she had left in this Midwest, I think it was Minnesota, and she was hanging out in Provincetown with Alan Dahl, who became Antonio's studio manager about 1965. And Alan introduced her to Antonio, and they clicked immediately. Saw a kind of resemblance, and I think already Antonio was almost characterizing Kathy's look and the nose and the mouth prior to even having her as a model, and then when he found her, it really came together. So they got this idea for Kathy to have a photo career that she was going to be a little bit unusual, which was allowed in those days. Girls were allowed to be personalities and express themselves, and they were booked. Individuals. They were booked for their looks, and although they did go mainstream and wear all kinds of high fashion and sportswear, they still were booked to maintain this kind of original look. So Kathy, they wanted a really curly hair do on her, and no one would do it, so they sent her finally to a little beauty parlor out in Queens, where she got her home permanent, and it made her hair like a little lamb. And it didn't always work, because when you have a permanent, you have like kind of straight hair, which she did. It was hard to work with, so she had the wig, which a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful loopy wig that she'd bring with her everywhere. And she'd pop it on. You can always look at pictures to see whether she's natural or wearing a wig. The other thing that she did was she was one of the first to do individual lashes under her eye. Girls were painting them on like Twiggy, but no one was really applying them all the way around one at a time. And she had that knack. She was so precise. She had beautiful fingers, and she used to paint on little tiny eggs, for a hobby, so she was perfect for it. When we were writing this book, I would call Corey at like 3 in the morning, and he'd give us the source of information. And
Because he knows beauty.
everything.
This is Carol Labrie, who's another model that Antonio used a lot. Pat and Lily. Pat, your butt looks great there.
Oh, goodness.
At this time, in the mid-60s, Antonio met Jane Forth and Donna Jordan, and he started working with Jane Forth before she became a Warhol star.
This is important because it wasn't just about Antonio's artwork that was really helping out his career, but it was his lifestyle. He, especially in the late 60s, he was really, hanging out at Max's Kansas City and all the hot night spots and dancing all night and getting inspired by that and bringing that to his work and going home and working all night, sketching someone that he met on a dance floor of Max's Kansas City. So he really was incorporating his lifestyle, and someone like Jane Forth wouldn't have been at a modeling agency, but he found her at
How much longer?
so he was able to find people, draw them, really cultivate their looks, and make them stars.
Here's some illustrations that you did of Jane.
And I think this is something that Corey could
Oh, and there's Corey.
Yeah.
Yeah, second from you guys left. That's it. With Jane and Kathy Damon, and that I think she's wearing a dress. She was a Native American, but she didn't dress like that every day. This was kind of some little photo shoot that we were always very spontaneous. Nothing was ever planned in the photo shoot.
Let's just do pictures.
Yeah, exactly. The light's good. Juan, get your camera. Let's do pictures. And so that's what happened this day. And so Kathy thinks she's wearing a Giorgio de San Angelo. Jane's wearing her own clothes. I'm wearing my own clothes.
Secondhand.
Yeah, vintage, secondhand stuff. And then Antonio he wore a lot of stuff in those days from Mr. Fish in London. I'm not sure what the shirt is, to be exact. And those boots I had made in Mexico. I went to Mexico with my art teacher for the 1968 Olympics, and we had there was a boot maker, and I had those boots made. I wore them for the next 3 years until
And the little sweater.
we loved high heels, the men and the women loved them.
Well, I think one thing that Corey told me was that Antonio was kind of the bridge between the fashion group and the Warhol group, and how they really didn't coexist at the time. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's correct, because I was thinking today that, ostensibly when Andy came to New York, Andy Warhol came in the, late 50s, early 60s, and he was carrying around a portfolio of his illustrations. He was, as most of you probably know, a great shoe illustrator, and then went on to illustrate a number of books. But he was very iconicized, I would say, in his shoe drawings. And I'm sure that later, because there's only a 10-year, maybe a decade apart between Antonio and Andy as peers, that they were seeing the same art directors, they were seeing the same editors, because they were both originally fashion illustrators. And Antonio kind of was sort of the series of the last fashion illustrators. And of course, by this time, Andy had moved on and had a completely different aura and kind of atmosphere that he created for himself. But I think there was mutual respect between the two. I know that I didn't pay a lot of attention to what was going on back then about that, because basically we just wanted to be famous and have
fun.
Have fun, thank Pat.
Yeah.
But there must have been I'm sure there was a real respect and a professional respect between Antonio and Andy.
Here's some images that Antonio did of Joe D'Alessandro and Jane Forth.
Jane was really beautiful. Her skin was like porcelain. You would think she was a doll when she walked into the room.
And these are some of Donna Jordan. Now, something that was very different of Antonio than other fashion illustrators at the time is that Antonio actually became very visible. A lot of fashion illustrators would do the work, and the work would stand for itself. Antonio not only had the work stand for itself, but he also became a celebrity. The way he dressed, the way he put himself out there, he modeled in editorials as well. So he went a step further than most illustrators.
Her superstars.
Exactly.
Antonio, Corey, Donna Jordan, Jane Forth.
Pat Cleveland.
Was there too?
These are all Antonio.
And, you know, at this point too, the peacock revolution was happening where menswear was finally becoming exciting and in fashion, and, you know, that's actually an
Who's
illustration of
Corey?
Corey.
But Antonio really was at the forefront of bringing men's fashion into the magazine publication.
So one thing that we were also doing as a collective expat entourage, because we all went together around the same time to Paris, and so Antonio and Juan were kind of our mentors.
They taught us it.
They had the apartment in which we quite often stayed.
We all stayed there in sleeping bags. We fell asleep on anything that was comfortable, each other, the chairs, anything. And we would be drawing so late into the night, it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except being beautiful and being drawn by Antonio.
That's the best way to describe how it was to be on the drawing side while Antonio sketched.
Oh my God.
Let him have it.
Oh, the juicy part? We were so all in love with Antonio. It was so divinely beautiful. I mean, he just made you feel you were the most important person in the world. And he had a lot to deal with all of us, with all of our egos, wanting to be big stars. And he made us into these incredible creatures that we never would have been able to become without him, because he had a vision. And as you would sit across from him, you could hear him actually breathing life into the paper, because he would be sitting there and he'd be making these magical strokes and his hands would like fly out, and he'd take a breath like, and then he'd look at you and he'd like draw you in with his eyes, and you just thought that was the moment. Conception. He understood who you were, and he put it on that paper, but he never let you see it. You could never go to the other side of that paper with him. And Juan would grab it and run off.
In the early 70s, Antonio went to Paris. Antonio and Juan went to Paris, and they brought a bunch of their models with them. Here's Nancy Noor and Pat.
Now, at this point, Juan and Antonio really fell in love with Paris. They really loved that the European magazines were regarding their illustrations as art and showcasing it as such in their magazines. So they decided to move there. And of course, moving there, they brought, you know, these two, they had, you know, an entourage, much in the way that Andy Warhol had his factory. And they electrified Paris.
They became friends with Karl Lagerfeld, and Antonio started working with Karl for Chloe.
And this was a very important collaboration because at this point, Karl Lagerfeld was the designer behind Chloe, which was a ready-to-wear label. And back in those days, ready-to-wear labels weren't considered high fashion. You know, they were what people wore, and couture was high fashion. And Karl Lagerfeld's Chloe collection was really influential in establishing ready-to-wear as a major force in the fashion industry. However, what Karl Lagerfeld didn't have, but Yves Saint Laurent did have, was this fabulous entourage. So they kind of mutually benefited from each other. You know, they worked together, but also Antonio brought an entourage with him that could inspire Karl, and Karl was able to introduce him to every single top magazine editor, stylist, and you know, really put Antonio's work out there.
But Antonio said, okay, go to work. That was the first thing. Now you're here in Paris. He invited us to stay with him. You've got to work. And so that's what we did. We worked it. Donna got her cover and wouldn't stop walking around Paris without holding it in front of her. Like, she was like so proud.
Pat, tell us about how you guys dressed.
Oh my gosh. So we all had our individual style, but the boys were really the leaders because they're so dandy, and the physique, you know, was quite amazing because they're all good dancers. So that was part of the whole thing, is dressing up to go out dancing. But dressing up was like a circus in that apartment. We had one tiny mirror the size of a box. We could all like be in it. And Corey would like torture us with black coal in our eyes. Nobody could leave the apartment without either blue or black coal. And so that was kind of odd because the boys would wear the coal eyes right? And really look amazingly, like very suave and very exotic. And then we'd go out dancing, and we brought the American music with us. And so no one saw those dances, and no one saw those looks that Curry would put on us.
I think when you guys were talking before about the Peacock Revolution, which is a chapter in your book, there was an equal amount of attention to men as there were to women at this period. Seeing that Antonio and Juan kind of exemplified this very dandy look that Pat was mentioning, but there was also a lot of grooming. The idea of men wearing makeup blatantly, not just makeup as a concealer or pretending that you weren't wearing it, but wearing makeup for makeup's sake, having hats and accessories that weren't particularly stylish at the time, but being made stylish. And the entourage, we all did, it's interesting because we did have our specific looks. Often Carl would open a big suitcase and throw, remember? He would
The
throw.
silks, he would